I'm going to be talking about my project, which is entitled Creating Natural Character Animation Using Paired Motion Capture Data. And I know that's a mouthful, so I'm going to break it down for you. So there are sort of two components to this. The first one being, what is character animation? And I'll sort of tackle that question in my next slide. And then sort of later on, I'm going to be talking about paired motion capture data and how I sort of use that to achieve better character animation. So with character animation, naturally, I think of Disney. Grew up loving Disney films, and character animation really is just the process of bringing characters to life, and it's through modeling and animating them to create the illusion of movement expression that you see in real life. So, like I said, my big motivation was recently a lot of great films came out in Kanto, Frozen 2, Turning Red, and just growing up, I really loved watching these films on the big screen. So when this opportunity presented itself, I sort of welcomed the departure from like the more technical aspects of computer science to sort of tackle the intersection between art and comp sci, uh, the more creative applications to sort of tap into the more creative part of myself. And I am also a big gamer, so I love video games. And these GIFs that you see, they're little snippets from the video game The Last of Us. HBO Max recently put out a live adaptation of that, but for cutscenes in the game, they actually have actors rigged up with markers, perform scenes, and their movement is captured and put directly into the game. So the possibilities really are endless with converting motion in the real world into the digital world. So to talk a bit about my project, the main aim was to use paired motion capture data and ground reaction force data, and then use them to create a model that would then facilitate more natural movement for 3D character animation. And this also has implications in other fields such as biokinetics. And in order to do so, there are three sort of steps that I highlight. First being capturing movement in a physical lab. The second being sort of cleaning that data and processing it such that we can use it to then run experiments. So paired motion capture data, what is it? So it's sort of the combination of two pieces of animation, motion capture data and ground reaction force data. So motion capture data is it is data that is basically based on the position of markers on the body, and it's captured with a series of cameras that are basically lined around the ceiling. And as you perform a motion, these cameras track the position of each marker and sort of capture the positions over time to capture the motion. The ground reaction force data is recorded with force plates on the ground. So if you sort of step on a force plate, it captures that ground reaction force data, which is the force that's exerted by the ground onto a body that is in contact with it. This is a peek inside the Applied Movement and Imaging Lab at Sargent College. In the lower red box, you can see, it's hard to see, but I highlighted the outline of a set of 5 force plates. And in the upper red box, that's just one of the many cameras that line the ceiling in the lab. So for capturing the data, we captured data for 7 participants. We had each of them perform 22 motions. We tried to capture a range of participants that differed in gender, height, and weight, just because one of the aims of this project was also to be able to capture how different body types move. So we really wanted to be mindful of that. And it was sort of a laborious process. We connected 96 reflective markers throughout the body, so that took a little bit of time, but we wanted to ensure that we were capturing all limbs and all the nooks and crannies of each of their bodies. So once we finished capturing the data, we were able to view it in an application called Qualisys Track Manager, and that's also where we did a bulk of the processing work. And with processing the data, it wasn't so pretty. It was a long process. And looking at this diagram, you can see there's sort of like a humanoid figure, but there are a lot of red dots. What do they mean? Well, with the limbs, with the dots that have been labeled, you'll see that there are some lines that connect them. Um, those are labels that have been successfully identified, but a lot of the markers are not successfully identified from the get-go, so it requires a lot of manual labeling. And the another big issue with this is usually with one trial of data, there are thousands and thousands of frames, and while you don't have to do it all manually, it does take a lot of work to make sure that a marker is tracked 100% of the time throughout the motion. But once it's fully processed, it looks a little something like this. Everything's nice, no red. But it definitely was one of the most time consuming steps. It took me like hundreds of hours of just like painstakingly clicking little dots. It wasn't fun, but it was important work. Um, but yeah, these are just a couple of the trials, and that's actually me. So I got to participate in the motion capture lab session, and it's super neat seeing yourself like on the computer and just moving because that's me. So it's cool. Um, but here are some preliminary results. So something we did was we took all of the data that we processed and we ran a model, and we trained it to basically be able to predict the ground reaction force data, which as a reminder is the amount of force exerted by the ground onto the body based on the location of the markers. So those sort of black dots are the location of the markers on the body. There aren't 96. We chose, I believe, 26 just because a more simplified model made sense. I'm going to direct your attention to the second and third panel. If you can sort of make out like the dark red dots, you'll see in the middle panel, that was only a model that was created from 30 minutes of training. But in the third panel, that's a model that was created with 3 hours of training. And you can see that the position of the dark red marker is a lot closer to the position of the light red marker, which means that our prediction was very close to the ground truth. So our aim is to be able to train on enough data to basically have our model be able to predict on any motion capture data that you feed into it, which has implications for 3D animation as well as for biokinetics. So sort of talking about future steps, we're currently iteratively processing the data and running experiments. I still have to process some trials, so it's definitely a work in progress. But we're aiming to release a complete data set and model for researchers to use for whatever means they want. So we're really hoping that our work is sort of like a stepping stone for more research in other fields. And yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I'm really curious to hear about your experience getting your motion captured in the lab. It sounds like such a unique experience, and I would
Yeah.
love to hear more.
Thank you for your question. So, like I said, it's pretty time consuming to get those 96 markers like stuck onto your body. So you have to like stand still, and then they're putting little pieces of tape on you. So that's like a whole process. But once you're engaged in performing the motions, you sort of get into the groove of things, and it's really exciting to. There was like a TV as I was performing the motions, so it was cool seeing like a little me doing all the motions. And something I wasn't prepared for was how much energy I had to exert during that trial. I walked over there like sore because I had to do like jumping jacks and hopping and all these like exercise motions for like 4 hours straight. So depending on what you're doing in the lab, like it's very strenuous for sure.
Wow, thank
Yeah,
you.
it was a workout.
Great job, Stanley. I was really curious about how you selected the motions. So, is that something that has been done in other similar studies and you're following the same ones, or was it just a wide range of movements?
It was the latter. So we just wanted to capture a wide range of motions. So we had stationary poses such as like the tree pose, the warrior pose, so yoga poses like that. And then we had more dynamic ones like jumping jack and hopping. We tried to capture natural movements, so walking, sort of idling, so how you would move if you were having conversation or just standing still. But we basically just hand selected motions that captured a wide range of movement.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Fantastic presentation, Stanley. And I wanted to ask, in terms of predictive models with mocap, I feel like a lot of the training comes from lots of, like you said, natural movements like walking and stuff like that. So regarding that, would you say that it's easier for predictive models to kind of model small gestures, especially like really minute facial expressions, or would you say that it's easier for the model to kind of predict large, exaggerated motions?
Yeah, I would say large exaggerated motions just because if you think of doing a jumping jack, it has a very sort of clear pattern of movement, even if there's variation in height or weight. Whereas the more minute movements, like if you were idling, I feel like that's a less defined movement. So each person would sort of move differently with that. So it definitely is trickier to capture that sort of natural, sort of minute degree of movement. So I would say for like jumping jacks or like hopping on one leg, just because of the fact that there's a more defined pose, that would be easier to classify and train on.
Okay, if we have no further questions, I actually have a question.
Yeah.
This is kind of going off of the last question, but you were talking about like further applications for your research, and the idea of the mechanism of like the weight distribution and stuff is very new to me, so I'm really interested in that. So my question is like, for therapies regarding people who have like different weight distribution or joint problems or things like that, do you think like this research could lend to that possibly?
Yeah, so we had the privilege of measuring ground reaction force data with force plates, but I'm not sure if other labs or physical therapy facilities or health facilities have that luxury. So it would be neat if by just so with our model with just motion capture data, they can predict ground reaction force. So I could see it playing a hand in being helpful if they had imaging techniques and captured the patient, and then were able to sort of predict that ground reaction force and weight. So that could be one way that our work could help them out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.